All right, welcome back to the channel. So in this video, we're going to talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr., Terence Crawford, and the Errol Spence Jr. fight. And the word on the street is that Floyd Mayweather Jr. wants to sign Terence Crawford and that he knows that he can get that fight done for Terence. Let's talk about that in this video. Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. In this video, we're going to talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr. and his attempt to sign Terence Crawford and the rumor that Floyd Mayweather Jr. would be promising Terence that he can get the Errol Spence Jr. fight. And of course, you know, Floyd Mayweather Jr. has enough money to make that fight sitting on his wrist at any given time. But before we get into that video, let me thank you for supporting the channel. If you're not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon so that you can be notified of when we release more videos. And also, thank you so much for everybody that continues to support the channel. All right, so let's get into this. All right, I've got notes sent to me on DMs on Twitter and Instagram. And, you know, I know for certain that Floyd Mayweather Jr. wants to sign Terence Crawford and that he believes that he can make a star out of Terence Crawford and all of that good stuff. But what now people are telling me, and something that I'm taking with a bit grain of salt, but it is definitely open for the conversation, is that Floyd Mayweather Jr. believes that he is the one that he can definitely make the Errol Spence Jr. Terence Crawford fight. And that, you know, because he himself has the ability to finance it. Now, I'm not sure whether or not Floyd Mayweather Jr., Floyd Mayweather Jr. flashes a lot of money without a doubt. I mean, the man's got what does he have, like an $18 million watch, some craziness like that, right? I don't have any doubts whatsoever that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is a ludicrously wealthy dude. However, Floyd Mayweather Jr. does not seem like somebody. He seems like somebody that is more into making money than he is in spending money. And even though he spends a lot of money, I've not seen him make a lot of very risky business decisions when it comes to actually promoting fighters and doing things like that. Leonard Ellerbe, who talks about when talking about Gervonta Davis, is very clear in that, look, man, we are not in the business of losing money. He specifically says we're not in the business of effing off money. So if we're going to pay somebody, it's going to have to make sense and all of that good stuff, right? So how can Floyd Mayweather Jr. do what Tim Smith, who is the director of communications for the PBC, how can he do something where those guys are obviously thinking that the money may not be there for a fight between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. Right now, one thing that he could do is sign Terence Crawford and make some smaller fights with like Keith Thurman and then build him up over a 2-3 fight deal to get the situation where they believe that they can sell the pay-per-views. They believe that they can sell, that Terence Crawford can actually like sell out, an arena himself and do it, go about it that way. Or he could take the fight over to Saudi Arabia and get somebody, or the United Arab Emirates, or do something like that, similar to what Bob Arum and not Bob Arum, but Eddie Hearn and those guys are trying to do on a consistent basis with fights, and just have somebody pay a lot of money just to get the fight, right? Where they may be, because, and now my impression of that is, though, that that's not a very likely thing, right? That Floyd is going to, number one, come out of his pocket to pay for it and lose money. I don't see him doing that, but I do see him being able to promote several fights with Terence Crawford and getting it to the point where he can get that fight with Al Heyman, and those guys are willing to take a gamble with it and make a lot of money. And I'm certainly hoping that that is what happens. But for the people that tell me that they believe Floyd Mayweather Jr. is going to actually out of his pocket pay for the fight, I have a hard time believing that. Because I just don't think he's that. I just don't think that guys like him, or even Oscar De La Hoya, because one of the things that I've heard about Oscar De La Hoya is, Oscar De La Hoya himself has a lot of money, but he separates his own personal finances and the money that he has from the business finances, and isn't making loans to Golden Boy Promotions out of his pocket, right? Which honestly inhibits the growth of Golden Boy, I do believe, because he seems like he's just kind of having it as, it's just kind of something he's doing kind of half-heartedly to keep his name in the news and to keep him busy and have him have a job, right? That's kind of what I've heard Golden Boy Promotions is to Oscar De La Hoya. I don't think Floyd Mayweather Jr. considers Mayweather Promotions is that. I think that he seems a lot more invested in Mayweather Promotions, right? But at the same time, I doubt very much that he's going to go, and break his own bank in order to keep that pushing, because that just doesn't make a lot of sense. However, if Terence Crawford but the biggest hurdle to it is Terence Crawford himself, right? Terence Crawford is just somebody that I do not think is going to do what people want him to do. If he was going to sign with the PBC and if he was going to work the route that would make the fight with Floyd Mayweather Jr., I think that he probably would have already done it. He would have seen that opening earlier when that opening was clearly present before he re-signed with Top Rank. I just don't have a lot of faith that Terence Crawford, even in order to get the Errol Spence Jr. fight, a fight that he says that he wants, a fight that I think is important to him for his career, for his Hall of Fame career, right? Like, one of the things that Terence Crawford says is like, I don't need the Errol Spence Jr. fight. I'm in the Hall of Fame right now. I'm telling you, I don't believe that he is. If I had a Hall of Fame vote and Terence Crawford was up for nominated for the Hall of Fame and I had a vote, what I would say is yes. I would click yes. Terence Crawford's in the Hall of Fame for me, no doubt about it. But what you're talking about is guys like Dan Rayfield, guys like Steve Kim, guys like Kevin Iole, guys like that who have at least I believe Steve Kim has a vote to the Hall of Fame. I know Kevin Iole and Dan Rayfield do. Them, no way they would put Jimmy Lennon Jr. in there before they vote for Terence Crawford to get in there, right? So I don't have faith. Miguel Cotto, I think what it'd take Miguel Cotto on the second ballot to get in there. Floyd Mayweather, Terence Crawford has not had the career and the fights that Miguel Cotto has, even if he does not lose any fights, right? Because some of these guys are going to make it into the Hall of Fame simply because they had great fights. You know what I'm saying? Like Mickey Ward and Arturo Gatti, they're going to make it into the Hall of Fame because they had great fights, not because they're the greatest fighters in the world, but they're going to make it into Arturo Gatti's going to make it into the Hall of Fame because of that, right? I don't know if Terence Crawford has that. So for his legacy's sake, if he doesn't fight Errol Spence Jr., he's just going to be a case that, he looked really great in the ring. He beat everybody that he was in front of. But, he never really proved it because he didn't fight the guy that honestly had the absolute best chance of beating him, and that's Errol Spence Jr. So, I would hope that, Floyd Mayweather Jr., I hope that it's true that Floyd Mayweather Jr. would go out of his way to try to figure out the financing for it by doing a couple fights with him, or coming out of his pocket, or trying to take it overseas. But I don't know, man. That just seems for me to be a little bit too much like right for Bud. Bud has already signed with another management company. There's a I think his management company's he's out of Saudi Arabia or now, because I do believe Daniel Kinahan, who used to be with MTK Global, is his advisor. So maybe there's that option for it. But I don't know if Errol Spence Jr. is going to be willing to go overseas to take that fight overseas. But anyway, it is what it is. Just thought I'd let y'all talk about that. Y'all make sure you let me know what you think in the comment section. Thank you so much for your support. Again, if you're not subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button before you leave the building. And with that, I'm out. Peace.